Everybody. Thanks so much, Susan. Yes, so last week, C3 released a report and we studied and compared the three leading alternative fuel options for transit buses. So we looked at battery electric buses, compressed natural gas buses, and hydrogen fuel cell electric buses. We first considered each fuel individually based on technological factors and their health and environmental impacts. And then we compared how the three options perform in the market. Ultimately, we came to the conclusion that BEVs are the recommended bus of choice for Charlottesville area transit and most transit agencies across the US, with California being the potential exception there. Our analyses concluded, as I mentioned, that BEVs are the best alternative fuel source, and we decided to complement our findings with on-the-ground information by conducting a series of surveys and interviews with transit agencies that are leading the transition to BEVs across the US. So let's dive into the first section of our report. So the table here compares infrastructure costs, which include vehicle and facility costs across the three bus types. In red, you can see the difference between CNG buses and the other two alternative fuels. And on top is when you don't consider federal grants. So without federal grants, BEVs are around 50K more expensive than CNG buses, and FCEVs, which is the hydrogen option, are $82,000 more expensive. But let's take a look at the bottom row. This is looking at facility costs, and I want to point out that the 900-ish thousand number in the BEV column is the estimate for the full fleet conversion. So that's a 63 bus scenario with fast charging. So just to kind of explain that, that's a transition that would happen, several years down the line. And when you're looking at this difference in numbers, we're talking about a difference of around $500,000 between this compressed natural gas option and the BEV fast option, again, potentially across a few decades. And you might be wondering where we're getting these numbers from. This information is from the city of Charlottesville contracted a consultant team, Kimley Horn, to study this issue. So the numbers that you see in this table and other tables are from information they presented to the city. Throughout the report, we wanted to make sure we're consistent with what the consultant found. So sometimes we use their information or information from their sources. And so that's something that you'll see again in our next slide, which looks at expenses for fuel costs for each bus type. So here you're looking at the per mile fuel costs. This is the second line in the gray box. And BEVs, you can see, have the lowest fuel cost and the lowest greenhouse gas emissions. That's going to be the line below that. And we should just mention that a great part of the BEVs performing better here on this kind of cost plus GHG emissions table is both the grid and their just better energy efficiency. So they have a higher miles per diesel gallon equivalent and a lower fuel cost. Okay, so away from cost toward environmental considerations, our next table looks at, or our next kind of set of slides look at tailpipe air pollution. So air pollution of concern from a regular diesel bus includes things like sulfur oxides, nitrous oxides, particulate matter, carbon monoxide. We've all seen or smelled emissions coming off of buses before, so you can kind of imagine what that's like. But with zero emission buses like BEVs or again the hydrogen FCEV, there aren't tailpipe. There's no tailpipe pollution. So I really want to underscore what an important part of the conversation that is. Transportation system has been polluting our air for generations, and in the U.S., transportation pollution is really closely tied with racial makeup of communities, and so transitioning toward transportation options that don't have tailpipe emissions would be both a huge public health and justice win. And so I want to be clear that even though it might be called natural gas, that kind of compressed natural gas option not only have greater greenhouse gas emissions, like we talked about in the previous slide, but they also have other air pollutants associated with them. So for instance, you can see that carbon monoxide emissions are 1,050% higher from CNG buses, and they still pollute um, other emissions like nitrous oxide, sulfur oxides, and volatile organic compounds, etc. And again, this comes from that Kimley-Horn report or from sources directly used in the consultant's work. All right, so that is kind of cost, environment. Let's look at the market for these three buses. So here's a snapshot of alternative fuel buses from 2021. So the first thing you can see here is the adoption of FCEBs, the far right column, has been slow, and their market share and the number of agencies operating this technology is just around 5% of that for BEBs. And then another aspect that comes to mind when you look at the second row is that there are vastly more CNG buses than there are zero emission bus options. But this doesn't really tell you the whole picture. So bring your attention to that first highlighted row. You can see that almost as many agencies have chosen battery electric options as have chosen CNG buses. And additionally, there's a really large amount of manufacturer diversity in the BEB market, which increases resiliency to any shocks. And so we can take this information in conjunction with our next slide and get a better sense of how these technologies are changing in the market. So when we considered both BEBs and CNG buses, so this is just those two options on this slide, because of kind of the more mature technologies, they've grown from 2015 to 2019. BEBs, have grown between 45 and 90-ish% when you're looking at like 2016, 2019. And at the same kind of time level, CNG buses have really only grown 12% to 25% each year. So even though CNG buses might occupy a larger share of the market right now than BEBs, their growth has kind of stagnated over the past 5 years or so, whereas BEBs seem to be increasing in popularity. And when you combine this information with how many agencies have adopted BEBs from the previous slide, it kind of paints this picture that BEBs are growing because agencies are starting to convert their fleet more and more over time. So let's put all of that information together. It's kind of a lot to throw at you guys. And I'll show you this kind of transit scorecard that we made. I think it's gonna, that's perfect. Thank you. The first part of this table. So this is a little, transit scorecard, like I said. The first part of the table considers expenditures and technological capacities. Note that when you're comparing the two zero-emission bus options, that's BEBs and FCEBs, BEBs perform the best in this category. And then if you look at each fuel type for its air pollution, climate impacts, and other community health-based considerations, BEBs score the best overall. That's kind of that second chunk. And then finally, BEVs showed to us the strongest market trend, showing that they're increasing, getting more popular. And then we just wanted to highlight, this next slide shows like the score for BEVs overall. And you can see that they scored the best overall. And because they scored so well, we wanted to explore this technology further. And we conducted a survey of transit operators like the ones that joined us today to learn more. And we engaged with 9 agencies across the US. One of the agencies has been using BEBs since the late 80s. Others have purchased BEBs in just the last few years. So we have really a diversity of experience that was represented in the survey. And together, the operators that we spoke to manage a combined 129 BEBs. And that's 12% of the BEBs that were in operation as of 2021. So it's really great to chat with all those people. You can see where they're located on the map.
James and Roman, if you can share what you like most about the battery electrics that you operate.
I like the passenger feedback that we've gotten. Everybody that has ridden these buses really enjoys riding them. They're quiet. They're among the newest in our fleet, so they're in the best shape. We operate in an historic downtown area here in Frederick. They don't contribute to noise pollution at all. So the outside diners appreciate, a couple fewer loud diesel vehicles that are going up and down. What we call it's Market Street here, but a main street in an historic community. So overall, the community feedback, the passenger feedback that we've received has been stellar, and that's why I like operating these buses so much, because they're the ones whose opinions matter the most.
Yeah, I would probably echo that. We get a lot of positive feedback from people in the community and our riders that just ultimately appreciate us going with the electric bus, and a lot of it has to do with people feel that it's better for the environment, and of course, it's not nearly as noisy to a bystander on the sidewalk. And making sure that you train your mechanics to be able to solve these problems. The old time mechanics of, well, we can just go out there and as a diesel engine, just take it apart and deal with it. You can't just go put your fingers in an electric bus and fix it. It requires a lot of diagnostic processes. So it requires a completely different way of thinking. So putting your foot in the water and just getting a couple to play with, for lack of better words, for the first couple of years, and getting people used to driving them, used to maintaining them, is going to be a much better method than, we're just going to go flip the switch and just go full electric tomorrow. That would be a bumpy ride. So that transition over a period of time is wise. And to Roman's point as well, buying it over a series of years will allow you to diversify your parts as the standardization happens beyond agreeing on ports and electrical components, but having third-party vendors come to the market and be able to provide parts. Where if you run into issues like we had that with the pandemic, of where we're not able to get one part for one particular bus, you've got different models and different years to be able to hopefully have those vehicles run while maybe the year that has the issue is down. So, it's important to diversify. It's important to think collaboratively and just realize that it's much more of a commitment than any executive director in the country saying, hey, we're going to do this. There's a lot of buy-in that has to happen. There's a difference in owning a bus and making it successful.
One thing that these bus manufacturers will do if you buy an electric bus from them is they'll give you the option to send somebody on site and kind of live with you for a little bit and train your technicians and help troubleshoot and kind of lead the way a little bit as your technicians get up to speed with how to deal with battery electric bus as opposed to your old diesel buses.
When we chatted with folks from different agencies, we got to hear kind of a picture of what, what's kind of been a story for a lot of agencies together. And so like that question that we asked, the first question about reliability, we had pretty high ratings from the transit operators. It was a scale of 1 to 5. Almost every transit operator answered 4 out of 5 for reliability, which was really good to hear. And I think that there was a lot of different ways that people approached the electric bus conversion. So we had, of those 9 people, we reached back out to some folks, and of those 5 who reached back out, one of those operators had en route fast charging, and so they were able to use their bus for their longest loops without issue. Other bus operators who still rated their buses as really reliable timed their buses to complement kind of the peak hours, peak ridership. And so there was a lot of different, or maybe they were just on shorter loops. So there's a lot of different creative strategies for managing how the transition to BEVs worked.
So I'll start with my newer buses. I have 4 BYD buses. And there were a couple of growing pains here and there when they were delivered that BYD addressed very quickly. And those 4 BYD buses are among the most reliable in my fleet. Now, the first generation of electric buses, which at this point doesn't really matter so much because that battery chemistry I don't think is still made anymore. I think it's lithium ion or something. Whatever that whatever the battery chemistry was 8 years ago. Forgive me, but I don't know all the ins and outs of that. Those are the buses that when they go down for months. And a single part will cost $20,000, and so that's why I didn't want to lump them in with our newer electric buses. But when, again, when they're working great, they're great. When they go down, it can be a challenge depending on parts availability and technician skills. But I still answered that overall, my newer electric buses are just as reliable, if not more, than their diesel counterparts.
And now we've progressed into a series of buses that can either be charged with an overhead pantograph or can be charged by traditional plug-in means. And really the transition that you've seen is there has been a significant change in battery chemistry that has allowed that to happen. And there's also been a number of items that have become standard. So if you look at the voltage of what these systems are operating at, the type of battery chemistry that is there, the charging infrastructure, the first, decade, 15 years of battery electric, you had a number of manufacturers trying to figure it out, going down their own paths and spending a lot of money on research and trying to figure it out and be able to get the first and best product to market. And now you have ended up with a set of standards that everybody agrees on.
And so as electric buses mature, and diesel's had over 100 years to mature, and it's in a good spot there. But electric has only been around for the last 20 years, but really only in the mass market for the last 10 years, if that. And so there's a lot of growth that needs to happen there, and standardization, charge ports, the bits that make the bus go, those all, as they become more standardized, it's going to be easier to run these buses and have less downtime for when they do go down.
So, I mean, you shouldn't let the concern over battery replacement be the decision factor on if you want to go electric or not, because, even if you go CNG or you go diesel, you're going to be shoving a new engine, a new transmission, a new drivetrain, a new whatever in it at some point in it. Is this going to cost more? Probably.
So for us, it really came down to infrastructure. The county, our investment in infrastructure was made with a solar array that was placed on our landfill, that is land that is otherwise unbuildable. And so with the solar array there, that was all the infrastructure that we really need to power not only our buses, but a whole bunch of buildings here in the county are 100% solar powered. And so given that, it didn't make sense to make further investment into a separate infrastructure just for fueling our buses. So for us, battery electric made the most sense.
I could spend 10 minutes answering this question. I'm not going to do that. We considered it. The biggest kind of deterrent right now, there's really two. One is there's no hydrogen station in the upstate of South Carolina, so we would have to build one. A hydrogen station to produce hydrogen is between $8 and $12 million. Or you have to store it, which can be done cheaper, but then you're going to be paying a higher rate to have it delivered. And two, the facility modifications that you have to make to be able to maintain those vehicles can be quite costly. It's a very explosive gas, so it's very clean, but whenever it catches on fire, it goes out with a bang. So we are prepared to transition in the future, but we know that we need to have at least 40 vehicles for it to make sense financially for us to transition over to it in current market prices. So maybe in the future, haven't ruled it out. Just for today, it does not make sense.